Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel will be Carter Adams with his talk titled Leading Effectively. Captain Carter Adams is a Wabash grad from the class of 2015. While at Wabash, Carter served as a captain on the swimming and diving team, was a member of the Sphinx Club, and served as a student body vice president. Carter commissioned in the Marine Corps in 2015, first serving as an intelligence officer at 3D Intelligence Battalion in Okinawa, Japan, and then as the course director for the Tactical Intelligence Officer course in Virginia Beach. Carter was then selected for the funded law education program and attended Berkeley Law, graduating in 2023. Carter has since returned to the fleet as a judge advocate, currently serving as a prosecutor with Legal Team Delta at Camp Pendleton in California. Carter lives in San Diego, California with his fiancee Rachel and their dog Bash. Let's give a warm welcome to Carter.
Everybody thinks his name is like Nash or whatever, so it's good to be in a place where people actually understand the reference of the name. Good morning, Wabash. Good morning. First and foremost, I want to say thanks to the Sphinx Club and Ian for inviting me out here today. It's really cool, quite an honor to come back to campus and give a talk. I also want to shout out my parents, my brother, and my lovely fiance Rachel for coming out here today. Appreciate it. So, quick story here on my dad especially. So I swam here at Wabash, and you always have these like really small dual meets and whatnot. So one time we had a dual meet up at Hillsdale College up in northern Michigan, and I think I was like swimming only like the 200 backstroke and the 50 freestyle, so not my best events by any stretch of the imagination. And my dad, on his birthday, drove 8 hours by himself to go watch that swim meet. So 16 hours total for maybe 2.5 minutes of very, very bad swimming. And now again, driving 6 hours with my mom to come be here today. So appreciate it, Dad and Mom. But back to the chapel talk. I honestly think this is one of the coolest traditions that makes this school so special. I remember sitting through numerous talks as my time as a student, and I remember thinking about what I would say if I ever had the opportunity to come give a talk. And sort of throughout the years since graduating, I would keep a running list of potential ideas when I would listen to an old professor or classmate or a friend give a speech. And then when Ian reached out last fall about coming back to campus, I gotta admit, I had no idea what to talk about. So I started thinking through some of the chapels that I sat through when I used to sneak in through the back after class, hoping there would still be donuts. And then the last 2 years sitting up front with the Sphinx Club. And I started thinking through some of these talks, and to be honest, I couldn't really tell you what any of them were about. I remember sitting here, I remember bits and pieces. I remember when we rang out President White when I was a student. I remember listening to some fiery and defiant speeches from professors as they were leaving the college. I remember sitting and watching my classmates give our senior chapel talk. And I remember sitting here, but I don't remember really what they said at all. But I do remember how they made me feel, how I felt. So I remember being grateful that they would come up and share their stories and their experiences and their lives. And so that's kind of what I hope to do here today. And so when I thought about what I could say, when I thought through some of the lessons that I've learned, specifically in the Marine Corps, many of which had to do with leadership, what it means to be a leader, and how to do so with compassion and with understanding, and do so effectively when you yourself could be so unsure. How to be a person that although you might not be the most experienced, you might not be the most knowledgeable, you might not be the oldest, but that people could look to. And I want to framework this with a couple lessons that I've learned from some fellow Marines about leadership. And ultimately, it's pretty simple. I think there's 3 key lessons here that are fairly simple in phrase, but more difficult in practice. So indulge me here for a second, Wabash. I know I'm standing in between you and Chow, but if you could repeat after me, those 3 lessons are to be humble, be genuine, and be there. Pretty simple, right? Yeah. So the first lesson is about humility. So in the Marine Corps and the military overall, there's like two tracks of personnel. You have your officers and you have your enlisted. Generally, on the enlisted side, think about your classmates or your friends that were 17, 18 years old. They enlist, they go to boot camp out of high school, and then they go off into do whatever their specialty is. And generally, they're considered like the doers. They're turning the wrenches, they're operating the systems, they're putting rounds down range. The common joke is that the enlisted actually work for a living while officers don't. And you can work all your way up through the enlisted ranks, and you can spend all your time in the military on the enlisted side of the house. And then you have the officers, and on the officer side, you generally have to have a college degree. And in the Marine Corps especially, you're expected to lead Marines. You're in the position of platoon commander or commanding officer. You're expected to lead this group of enlisted Marines. And so this can lead to a very interesting dynamic if you're a junior officer. And you're coming in, you're new to the fleet, you're new to the military overall, and you're put in charge, theoretically, of this platoon of Marines from 17 all the way up to 30 to 40 years old, potentially. And so I commissioned in the Marine Corps in 2015 when I graduated. I was right out on the mall there underneath the flagpole with a classmate of mine, Captain Edward Pingle, a Theta Delt, hoorah. Apparently none here today. Afterwards, we went off to the basic school, and at the basic school, you get 6 months of training on how to be a provisional rifle platoon commander. And you go on to your specialty course, and then off to the fleet from there. And my first duty station was Okinawa, Japan, with 3rd Intelligence Battalion. And so when I got there in 2016, I was 23 years old. I had been in the military for maybe a year at that time, tops, and all of that had involved just training. And so I would be somewhat what you would somewhat affectionately and somewhat derogatorily call a boot, or more aptly a boot lieutenant. And I get out there, and my first platoon, I get put in charge of this geospatial intelligence platoon. And so long story short, these guys are highly and technically trained to analyze the battle space and how topography of an area will affect capabilities and limitations of what we can and can't do. And it involves a lot of complex data analysis. And I mean, I was an econ major here, so I spent a lot of time in the library running regressional analyses for Professor Mikek, but I mean, this was a whole nother level. And so not only that, but my senior enlisted in my platoon was a guy named Master Sergeant Spencer Smith. Now, Master Sergeant Smith, he was 38 years old at the time. He had been in the Marine Corps for 20 years. So I'm the platoon commander, but standing next to me is a guy who's been in the Marine Corps almost as long as I had been alive. He had been doing this job, been forward deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, doing this job while I was still here, while I was in high school. Heck, even when I was still in grade school, he was doing that. And so Master Sergeant Smith, I was a boot, and Master Sergeant Smith was definitely not a boot at that time. And so what I learned, and what Master Sergeant Smith made sure that I learned very quickly, was a little bit of humility. And you have to realize that you're not, and you have to know what you do not know. You have to not be afraid to ask questions or ask for help from anyone, even and especially as a leader. And so those first few months, I would just sit down with my Marines, and I watched, and I learned, and I asked questions. I wasn't necessarily leading, but I was following, and I was learning. And you have to be humble enough to know when to lead, and you have to be humble enough to know when to follow. So understand that you're going to be put into positions that you're not necessarily going to feel prepared for, that you're not necessarily going to feel like you have enough understanding, and that you're not necessarily going to feel like you're ready for, especially the seniors here today as you go outside of Wabash. But I ask that you be humble enough to know what you do not know, and be humble enough to ask questions of anyone, because that humility that you can bring forward is just going to pay dividends. Now, I was never going to be an expert in what my Marines did, but as their platoon commander, I could at least understand how they did their job and what they needed from me and what I could do for them to make our team more effective and more efficient. But I only learned that because I quickly learned a little bit of humility from Mass Sergeant Smith. And so that first lesson I hope you take away is humility. Have humility and understand that even if you're in a leadership role, you might not be the most knowledgeable or the most experienced. But with a little bit of humility, you can learn, you can grow. So my first lesson to you is to be humble, which brings us to our second lesson. And I ask that you indulge me again for a second. Everybody close your eyes. I want you to take a second, and I want you to picture a leader. Picture what you think that person looks like. Picture what you think, how they should act, how they should carry themselves, what type of personality they have. Everybody got some image in your mind? All right, you can open your eyes now. You don't need to keep them closed. So the second lesson is to be genuine. And that has two separate but sort of connected parts. The first is to be genuinely who you are. Going through the basic school, you get a lot of instruction and discussion on leadership. You get told these stories of these fantastic leaders, both enlisted and officer alike. These sort of hard-nosed, top-of-the-line guys, these Captain America types, right? And so I had this picture of what a leader should look like and how a leader should act. And when I got into this leadership role, I kind of assumed that's how I needed to act. That's who I needed to be imitating, right? But I realized, perhaps a little bit more slowly than the humility lesson, that was never me. It was never going to be me. Despite what my mom and despite what now Rachel tells me, I am not Chris Evans. I am not Captain America. And the Marine that embodied this to me the most was a good friend of mine, Captain Josh Coleman. He grew up outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he's actually going to be a groomsman in our wedding this fall. But what he demonstrated to me is that leaders are genuine. They are true in who they are. And here's the second part. They truly care about those around them, about those on their teams. So as to that first part, as I said, I had this little sort of distorted, stereotypical view of what a leader needed to be. And when I got out to the fleet, I am trying to do my best Chris Evans impression. But neither I nor Captain Coleman, we never really fit that mold. And he demonstrated to me the point that leaders can come in all shapes. Leaders can come in all sizes, all colors, all creeds, all personalities, all backgrounds. They can be loud and outgoing and boisterous, or they can be soft-spoken and introverted and quiet. It's less about how you are and more about who you are. And so that second part means to genuinely care for those around you, those on your teams and on your clubs, in your houses here on campus. And leaders will create environments where those around them feel truly supported and invested in. And I think this is especially true in the Marine Corps, because I think people in general seek the Marine Corps out for a reason. They walked into the Marine Corps recruiting office for a reason, and that's because the Marine Corps is different. It's different than the other branches. I think that reason generally is that people want to be challenged. They want to do more. They want to become more, and why you join the Marine Corps, which I also think is what you can say about your teammates and your classmates. It's kind of why you came to Wabash too, right? It's why you're not at IU. It's not why you're not at Purdue. It's definitely why you're not at the school down south. You join the Marine Corps, you come to Wabash to do more, to become more, to be part of something bigger than just yourself. And so when others feel supported and invested in by their leaders to accomplish some goal or some mission, they will offer that support and effort 10 times back over. So ultimately, when you have someone who takes a care and an interest in doing so is genuinely themselves, people will feel part of that team and feel supported and do whatever is necessary to accomplish that mission. Otherwise, I think people in general can see right through any sort of act, just like my Marines could. And so Captain Coleman so much embodied this lesson. He wasn't acting. He was so much himself, and he cared so deeply about every Marine that he came across. He was soft-spoken, he was inquisitive, he was thoughtful, and he was genuine. He didn't have to be Captain America. He just had to be himself. And so for that, I think he was one of the best leaders that I've had the pleasure of working with. And so my second lesson for y'all is to be genuine. And that image that we had in our heads at the beginning of this can look just like any of us, can look just like anyone. So long as you are true to who you are and you truly care about those around you. And that now brings to the third lesson, to be there. And this lesson actually comes from a Marine that I've never met. It comes from a story that I was told and has stuck with me. It's a tale about a Marine called Private First Class Brown, PFC Brown. And so going back to the enlisted and the officer structure, on the Marine Corps side, Private First Class is the second lowest level in the enlisted ranks. You generally come in and graduate from boot camp and you're a private, and then you pretty much promote to Private First Class pretty soon after that. So PFC, you're generally not in any sort of leadership role. You're just a member of the platoon. You're a member of the squad. And so PFC Brown was a part of an infantry battalion out at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. In 2007, they were deploying to Fallujah, to Iraq. And the first sergeant, the senior enlisted guy in the company, he had to come up with a roster, a list of Marines that were going to go on the deployment and a list of Marines that were going to stay behind, that weren't going to go. And Private First Class was not what you would call an ideal Marine in garrison. He was frequently in the company staff's office for, let's just say, less than ideal circumstances. And so when First Sergeant was making the roster of Marines that he could trust, that he could take downrange to Iraq, PFC Brown's name, understandably, wasn't on that list. Instead of being happy about it, PFC Brown, he was distraught. You see, Fallujah was not a place for the faint of heart at the time. It was not a place that many Marines even would want to go. But PFC Brown, he gets the news that he's not deploying, and at the end of the day, the first sergeant's in his office, and up walks PFC Brown. He knocks on the hatch, and he says, "Hey, First Sergeant, can I talk to you?" First Sergeant, not wanting to deal with this Marine at the time, says, "Hey, if it's important, wait 30 minutes and come back. I'm busy." Instead of leaving PFC Brown, he just stays there, waits by the door. So after about 15, 20 minutes of this, First Sergeant goes, all right, PFC Brown, come in. What is it? What do you want?" And PFC Brown tells him, he says, "I have to go. I have to be there for my Marines." First Sergeant goes, "All right, understood." He says that if the platoon commander and the platoon sergeant, so PFC Brown's more immediate supervisors, want him there, he'll put him on the roster, he'll put him on the go list. And so the next day, when the first sergeant asks the platoon commander and the platoon sergeant, without hesitation, both of them say yes. PFC Brown had told them the same thing the previous night. So in the Marine Corps, we talk a lot about leaders needing to put themselves at the point of friction, at the point where issues may arise, the point where things could go off the rails. And so they do that so you can quickly identify and resolve those issues. PFC Brown, he knew that he needed to be there. He couldn't get left behind because he needed to be at that point of friction for his fellow Marines. And so despite his shortcomings in garrison and stateside, PFC Brown went to Iraq with his unit. He wasn't in any sort of leadership role. He was just a platoon member. He was just a part of the squad, but he understood the importance of it all. So a couple months later, the unit is in Fallujah and they're taking fire. PFC Brown's fire team, the 3 other Marines that he operated with, they needed to cross this street. But they were taking sniper fire. So PFC Brown, he takes up this exposed position and he starts putting rounds down range to suppress the enemy sniper. If PFC Brown's firing, then ideally the sniper's head's down and he's not firing at his fire team. But he takes this exposed position. He does this to allow his team to get to the other side of the street safely, to follow on with the mission. He puts himself in that position because he needed to be there. That's what his team needed him. That's where his team needed him to be. And his team, they make it across the street, but PFC Brown, taking up that exposed position, he takes a shot from the sniper and ultimately pays the ultimate sacrifice. I tell you that story not to make you sad, not to bring you down, but to understand the importance of being there for others. And that doesn't even require you to be in any sort of leadership role. That you can effectuate change and you can make a difference regardless of your rank, your authority, or your position. I know Captain Houston Mills gave you a chapel talk earlier this year, and he told you the importance of servant leadership. And that's how you do it. You got to be there. You have to be willing to sacrifice. Sacrifice your time and your energy and your efforts for others. In doing so, you can change others. You can change this school. You can change your community around you. But you just have to be there, like PFC Brown was. So those are the 3 lessons that I want you to take away from this chapel talk. To be humble, to be genuine, and to be there. Those are the qualities that I've learned from fantastic leaders. And I understand that it's not perfectly achievable. It's a continuing effort. It requires practice and focus and something to strive towards. But as you strive towards it, you can make an impact. You can change the lives in the community around you. And I think this lesson extends beyond just the military. Same principles can apply here on campus to your teams and your fraternities and your houses and your clubs and your organizations. So I wanted to leave you all with a question. At the basic school, you learn about this old Air Force colonel, Colonel John Boyd. He was a fighter pilot, and he was sort of this outside-the-box innovative thinker. And due to that, he ticked some people off. He didn't necessarily color inside the lines, which doesn't usually bode well if you're looking for career advancement in the military. And so due to that, he never advanced beyond colonel, even though by all accounts, Colonel Boyd, he ought to have been a general based off of his experience and his knowledge and his abilities. But regardless, even from that position, he changed the way that the military and the Marine Corps thinks about combat. He had these impacts, these far-reaching impacts to this day on military doctrine and philosophy. And he asked this question, and he sort of stands as a testament for this question of, would you rather be somebody or would you rather do something? And I'm sure we can all think of leaders who would rather just be somebody than do something. They'd rather have the title or the position or the authority than actually make any sort of impact that comes along with that power. And so I ask, as you figure out what's next, as you figure out what's next for you on this campus, and as you figure out what's next for you after your 4 years at Wabash is over, would you rather be someone, or would you rather do something? And I think if you choose to do something, you can make far-reaching impacts on your teams, on your houses, this community, this school, and beyond. And I think great leaders do that by being humble, by being genuine, and by being there. Thank you, Wabash. I truly appreciate your time and the opportunity to share it with you today. Thank you so much. And as always, Wabash always fights.